I think we've all had the experience that when you're sick, you start feeling better, and then someone goes, well, how are you feeling? And you go, well, I'm finally feeling like myself again. There's a sense that our wellness and our sense of self are intimately connected. You just go, or maybe when you're starting to get sick, you just say, I just feel like something's not right. There's something that's just not right. I just don't feel like myself, we say. And so there's an interesting connection between healing, health, wholeness, and our sense of who we are. And it's an interesting conversation to take all those pieces and to connect them to God, and to say, what happens when we don't feel like ourselves and we get a word from the Lord? When God gives us a word, and being in the presence of that word takes us on a journey of healing, not just as a moment, but as an unfolding of wholeness in our life. So the two stories we have one from 2 Kings, and we have one from the Gospel of Luke this morning that help us reflect on this idea. And you kind of got cheated a little bit. I don't oftentimes say that, but you really got cheated because the first reading has so many more details that got left out. Maybe the people who chose the reading said, oh, they don't cut that, they won't care, cut that. So if you ever take them and reread them, this would be one you want to reread, because the story of the Syrian general, and he's called an Aramite, but to us we can just say Syrian. The story of the Syrian general Naaman is an important tale, an important story, and the details are really wonderful that I want to share with you. So you already get the idea. He's kind of like the General Patton of Syria. He's a great general, he's very famous, he's very powerful, and he's rich. So he's rich, he's powerful, he's very successful, and yet none of those things, being rich, being successful, being powerful, has kept him from getting sick. Now, something you should know is that the word leprosy in the Bible is actually a whole constellation of potential diseases. We sort of think of people with limbs rotting, Hansen's disease or Ben-Hur, or certainly in the Old Testament, that disease probably wasn't even in Israel by that time. It seemed to have come with Alexander the Great when his troops went to India and then came to the Middle East. But it could be any number of things. It could be psoriasis. It could be vitiglio. It could be any number of skin diseases that fit within a series of criteria that are presented in the priest manual of Leviticus, saying this will disqualify you from worshiping in God's house. But whatever it is, whatever illness he has, and maybe he has a very serious illness, being famous, being a great general, being rich, has not kept him from being sick. And you probably know that when you get really sick and when nothing works, you're most willing to try anything. There's a desperation in our illness where if someone goes, well, have you tried this? You go, no, but I'm willing to try it. I'll try anything. I'll try something in the United States. I'll try something in Mexico. I'll try something in Germany. I'll try oils and juices and chemotherapy. I'll try anything I can try if it means I have a chance at getting better. And so what we have in the story is a slave girl who was captured on a raid goes, well, maybe you should go to my home country and try one of the prophets. And it's the faith of a slave. And he doesn't go, be quiet, slave. I told you never talk in my presence. He goes, oh, what's that about? Who's that? I'll try it. And so he goes to the king, and the king goes, sure, I'll send you a letter to the king of Israel. And it's the faith of this slave girl that kind of gets this story unfolded, the story of the Word of God providing a healing. Now, one of the details that gets left out is when he packs his bag, he packs silver, he packs gold, he packs bolts of cloth. It's kind of like when the United States goes into a foreign country, especially in a time of war, we pack duffel bags with shrink-wrapped piles of $100 bills in case we need to bribe warlords or pay people off. We literally have huge stacks of shrink-wrapped $100 bills into the millions of dollars that get used for the various commerce of war. And this general has access to the same stuff, and so he has shrink-wrapped hundreds that he's going to take and say, hey, if this pays off, someone's going to get rich. I will pay anything to get healed of this disease. And so they send a letter to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel is no prophet. The king of Israel is just a guy trying to make his way in the world of powerful countries, and he goes, oh great, they're sending General Patton to get healed by us. I'm no healer, I'm no God, I'm just a king. Well, we're in trouble now, because when General Patton comes and we don't heal him, they're going to be really mad. until he gets a note from the prophet Elisha. Now, the prophet Elisha is he sometimes gets overshadowed by his mentor, Elijah, and their names are very close. Are you Elijah? No, I'm Elisha. Well, so you're not Elijah? No, Elisha. But it's fine, you can call me either one. People call me Elijah. I'm sure it's like people confused his name all the time. And he was the successor to the great Old Testament prophet Elijah. And he sends a note to the king going, fine, it's fine, don't worry. I'll take care of it. And so the guy comes with the motorcade. Today it would be all the heavy armored Cadillacs and SUVs, but in this time it's chariots and horses. And he pulls up in front of the prophet's house with the motorcade, with all the soldiers, with all the trapping of power. And he expects that the prophet is going to come out and go, the great king of Syria, or the general of Syria, let me heal you with some magical gestures. He's hoping for a little magical theater, calling down from heaven this great healing. The prophet doesn't even come outside. Imagine a presidential motorcade pulls up in front of your house, and you just take a note to one of your kids and say, hey, go give this to them. And you go, aren't you going outside? I'm not going outside. I don't need to go outside. Go give him the note and tell him to leave. And that's what he does. He sends a messenger to the great general who's come with his shrink-wrapped $100 bills and his motorcade that just says, go wash in the river 7 times, you'll be healed. That's the interaction. No prophetic theater, no magic, no, oh my gosh, I can't believe I met you. Do you mind if I take a picture so I can show my friends? There's none of that. And the general is offended. That's what's so great. The general goes, that's it? And now he's kind of sees his desperation for a cure for what it was. I traveled all this way for this. I could have done this back home. I could have washed in a better river than the Jordan back home. I could have done all this back at home. And they go, well, if he told you to do something heroic and hard, wouldn't you have done it? The quest for the Holy Grail, wouldn't you have done it? And he goes, yeah. And they go, well, you might want to try washing and see what happens. So he does, and he's cured. And the details that get left out, which makes this such a great story, is he gets cured, he goes back to the prophet's house and says, hey, I want to give you the money I brought. I want to pay for the cure. And the prophet goes, I'm not taking any money from you. Thank you very much, you can leave. And so he leaves, and then the prophet's assistant, whose name is Gehazi, the prophet's assistant goes, what? We were just about to get rich. And so he follows Naaman on his own and says, oh, stop, hey, over here. And Naaman goes, yeah. And he goes, I'm the assistant to the prophet. Remember me? I brought the message and this and that. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, the prophet's changed his mind. And he goes, okay, well, take whatever you want. Here, you want $500,000, take whatever you want, take it. And he goes, thank you. And when the prophet gets back, he goes, what was that about? And he goes, what do you mean? And he goes, you took money. We're not taking money for this. And actually, the prophet's assistant's greed and his inability to see that God's interacting with the world through his word is not to be bartered with or not to be bought or not to be transacted, something bad happens at the end of the story. He doesn't die, but the prophet's so disappointed that he couldn't just let that interaction be what it was, that it wasn't about the power of the prophet. It wasn't about the power of a man's wealth and his access to health care. It was the story about a word healing someone in a surprising way. And that word with a capital W becomes the word of God that encounters us, that brings healing and wholeness as God brings us back to ourselves. And that becomes the story. And one of the things that we're going to find out, and we'll see this a little bit with Jesus, but we'll see even more so in the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, is sometimes, actually in all times for the Christian, the process of coming wholly to ourselves will include a cross, will include a death, but will include a promise of life on the other side. But we're not quite there yet. This next story we have with Jesus and the 10 lepers, and Jesus is walking to Jerusalem. We can imagine a lot of people are walking in a pilgrimage festival, and he meets 10 lepers. And the 10 lepers offer a wonderful prayer, which is, Jesus, have mercy on me. Jesus, have mercy, and may your mercy be a kind of healing. So often in our Western world, healing is simply a healing of our physical, material body. I have mental problems or I have spiritual problems, but what I really have is a bad knee, and that's what's really hurting me. And in the Bible, the healing that God brings is not just something that's physical it's something that's mental, it's something psychological, it's something spiritual. It's taking the complete person and bringing them to a kind of wholeness. So that's why in one of the books, when it talks about healing, it also talks about forgiveness of sins. God brings a kind of forgiveness of sin with healing. And so these 10 guys go, have mercy on us, and Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest. And that was the idea that if you had one of these skin diseases, now by this time they could have had leprosy as we know it, but if you had one of this list of skin diseases, you had to be verified that you were cured by going to the priest, and there was about a week and a half ritual whereby you would be restored to the community, a ritual of getting rid of old clothes, a ritual of shaving off hair, a ritual of cleansing and restoration, being marked with blood. There was a whole series of steps of restoration to a community. And it says, as they were on their way, they were healed. Now this ties a little bit to what I said last week when I said sometimes what Jesus is calling us to, or maybe all times, is just to go and do the work. Not to measure our faith, not to go, the faith that we live on is Jesus' faith himself. The faith of Christ is our faith, and so we just have to go about his work. And what these guys find is they don't go immediately and get a diagnostic assessment of their health. They simply start doing what Jesus told them to do, and as they're doing it, they find themselves healed. And so on the journey itself, God's work of healing transpires. Now you know the story. Only one of them comes back and visits Christ. The other 9 presumably go to the temple. It's a little bit unfair because he goes, where are the other 9? And it's like, well, the other 9 are doing what you told them to do. The other 9 are at the temple, or they're on their way to the temple, telling the priest that they're cleansed. Isn't that what you told them to do? But maybe the one who's the Samaritan sees that the healing power of God wasn't going to be happening in that complex of places. The healing power had come when this word had been spoken to him, and so he wanted to be connected to the word giver, the word bringer, and actually, as we would say in Christian theology, the Word made flesh. And so this is the invitation to us, who are Christians, to be in communication, to be in communion with that Word made flesh, to bring those sick and ill and broken places into his presence, and finally to bring our dying into his presence. This was an interesting idea about the ancient church and early Christian theology. They say, was the incarnation of Jesus, God taking on our flesh, just Christmas? God takes on our flesh and that's it? Or is everything that happened to Jesus God taking on our flesh, including finally his cross? The cross being the final seal of God bringing our humanity into himself. And this is more often than not the human experience that Jesus is bringing about for healing. Not that God is going to simply alleviate some of our various conditions, though that may be. God is going to take that cross that we are bearing, which may in fact be an illness, and he is going to fold it into his own nature and make it alive with his fire, the fire of his love. This is how the early church would describe it. They would say, take a piece of iron. It's cold and it's hard. Bring it close to fire, and it takes on the nature of fire. The fire does not change, but the iron does. The iron takes on the nature of God's fire, and the fire stays the same. And so we bring bodies marked with crosses. We bring bodies marked with suffering. We bring lives marked with illnesses of mind and spirit and brokenness. And we bring that into the fire of God, and it takes on the fire of God. It glows with his love. And the glowing of our lives with God's love is the promise of a redemption, that we are no longer afraid of this power of death, but that we will walk with Christ, trusting that he will lead us to Easter. And that was Jeannie's second reading. The second reading that's not printed in your bulletin. That second reading where Paul says, if we stay with him, we will be like him. We will rise like he rises. We will ascend like he ascended. We will be alive like he is alive. And so that's where we see a story like Naaman and a story like the 10 lepers. These are just little indicators of what God has in store for everyone. That the word that heals, the word that addresses and cannot be bought, cannot be influenced with fame or power. That Word, which is accessible to everyone, is reaching out to a crucified world and taking those bodies and making them alive with the fire of God's love. And it is a fire that will glow in our dying and death. It is a fire that will glow in our rising